So we at Utah State have been working with wool as a mulch for this is our third year with it. And I think you all probably know Chad Page better than you know me. Chad is our sheep and goat specialist at Utah State University. He's a friend of mine. And the way the story goes is a few years ago, he told me about the situation. I'm a soil scientist. I work with crops, flowers, vegetables, fruits. And he said that there's just it's really difficult to sell wool, and a lot of it's getting thrown into the landfill. Is there anything that you could do with it with your crops? And so I got really excited about that question because I like to try to reuse things as much as possible, avoid going to the landfill. And I was interested in wool for a few reasons. One is I know it's got nitrogen in it. That's the number one plant nutrient. And it's also the naughtiest nutrient because it doesn't want to stay in the root zone. It wants to go everywhere else but stay there. I was also interested in it because I can get so hot here in Utah in the Southwest. Is that something that could help insulate the soil? I wasn't sure. And then on top of that, we're in and out of droughts. Some of us are always in droughts, it seems like. And so what I wanted to know too, is there going to be a way that we could try to save water while we're growing our crops? Back in 2021, we had a really bad drought. And at our research farm, we were told we just weren't going to have water after August 1st. And that really put a light bulb in my head that, geez, I need some ideas in my back pocket for ways that we can save water and still grow our crops. I'm going to show you a little bit on two studies today that we've been doing. My goal as a researcher is to understand the good, the bad, and the ugly. I want the whole picture. If we're going to try to use wool as a mulch, I don't want to sugarcoat things, but I want to do a really deep dive into it. And so I'm really lucky because after 2 years of doing pilot studies, my undergraduates have helped out a ton. Alex Rodriguez, he's actually on the Zoom right now. He's going to make sure I'm staying truthful here, I think. But Alex is my master's student. He started in January and he took over this trial, and I couldn't be happier. He's been doing so much hard work. So with that, let me get into it here. So introductions, we had a little bit of that. Yes, there is extra wool. That's been established. And so what we're trying to do is work with wool as a mulch, something that's applied on the surface of the soil is what I'm most interested in. It's already used there's some work being done to pelletize wool. So it's in a little pellet and it can get mixed into the soil. It can get added to baskets and so forth to help add water or hold water into the soil. But I was really curious about it in its most raw form because I think that anytime there's processing, that can be a barrier. And so what if we could set up these networks between producers, wool producers, and growers? And if it's in a raw form, that's the easiest way to transfer it directly. So I want to know about it in a raw form, and I'm going to share a bit about what we've been looking at today. Now, my lab has been studying cut flowers because no one studies cut flowers. They're worth a lot of money, and we don't know much about them. They're really tough to grow here in Utah and so a big part of my program is developing guides to be able to grow cut flowers. But that said, it doesn't really matter what crop we're studying. Sorry, Alex. We want to understand the form of the plant and how it responds. We want to try a lot of different crops to see the diversity in that response. But cut flowers are extremely sensitive. And so if we can grow cut flowers in wool, then we can definitely grow a lot of vegetables and fruits too. So think of flowers as kind of this representative. And I got to study it for our growers here, but we can certainly apply those results to other crops. Okay. So this is my lab, the Small Farms Lab. I just want to give extra appreciation to these students here because without them, my lab wouldn't run and I wouldn't have a lot of data to show you. So it's really them who are doing all the work in the field. All right, so the goal in our lab, I mentioned that we work on cut flowers because there's so few people who have studied, and especially not in our region where it's hot and dry and high up in the mountains where the sun's really intense. So we need regional production information in order to grow things well. And that's the job of my lab. And it's what I get excited about. as a soil scientist. So we do things that are very basic, like saying, yeah, this is a good crop to grow. No, don't grow this here. Let them grow it in Washington State or Florida or some place that's very different from here. We work on season extension. So sometimes it takes forever for a flower to first start blooming here with our cold nights and our intense sun. So a big part of my program has been season extension. How can I get this crop to bloom or be able to harvest it sooner or later to make that season as long as possible so that it's as profitable as possible for farmers. But now this is the part that I'm moving into and I'm most excited about, and it's how can we work on different methods to save nutrients, save water, take better care of our soil so that we're producing in the short term, but we're also setting up for success in the long term. And so we're developing irrigation rates for flowers so that we can say, all right, this is all that flower needs and no more. That's a great way to save water. And then we're also playing around with purposefully stressing the flowers out. We're trying to give them, is we know they want more water and we're not giving it to them. And then we're trying to see, all right, well, which flowers can still yield pretty well, even if they're not getting everything they want. And then finally, what we're moved into this year is starting to work more with perennials and getting those established and looking at the mulches. So that's a little bit about my lab. If you know someone or are interested in research and education at Utah State, we're always looking for interns to join the lab, especially next year. One of my interns is graduating, so keep Utah State in your mind. We do a lot of crop and soil research, and then there's many other folks who do all kinds of other things to catch your interest. So what we'll be talking about today then is our pilot study where we purposefully didn't give flowers enough water and just saw how they did using tunnels, and I'll talk more about what those are, and then wool and bare soils, and then we'll talk a bit about how that's progressed to really study wool in detail. So getting into the mulch background, in cut flower production, but also vegetable production, using plastic mulch is very common on farms. It's got a lot of benefits to it. It's one way that we can actually advance production. So here on the picture on the left here, this is a flower called Lisianthus or desert rose, and you can see it's planted into a black plastic. And one of the things that black plastic can do is heat up the soil early in the season, and that can give us a leg up to get things started sooner. Up here in Cache Valley, where it gets kind of cold at night, it gets under 60 degrees for most of the summer. Peppers and tomatoes don't like that. And so we plant peppers and tomatoes into black plastic, and keeping that root zone warm is a way for us to increase our yield. Same with squash, winter squash, pumpkins. Especially those with long maturities, we'll plant them into black plastic to help them move along through the season. So it can help trap heat in the soil. It also can help with weed control. We've done it with different flowers here that you can see, but it's expensive. And this plastic that's on the picture on the left has to get replaced every year. So that's a lot of plastic waste. And our flower farmers in particular really want to get away from plastic. They don't like it on their soil. They don't like the way it looks. They don't like buying it. They don't like the waste. Also, it can be great in the beginning of the season to warm up the soil, but then it can get too darn hot for a lot of these crops. I think Lisianthus here, we need to do a study with white plastic, I think, because it just bakes them in the summer heat. So it's not all wonderful. And so we're trying to look at, all right, this is the go-to for a lot of our farmers of horticulture crops. Is there a different kind of mulch we can use? There's more natural options. These are pictures from my house. So wood chips and bark. We like that because it can add organic matter to the soil. That's very rich. It has nutrients. It helps the soil hold water. It's a slower breakdown, and it's great with perennials to add wood chips, but it's a problem for annual crops because it gets in the way with tillage. It has a lot of carbon, and it can steal nitrogen from the soil. Nitrogen is the number one plant nutrient, and so we really don't want it to go to other things, but there's more debate around that. But those are some of the issues with it. And then there's hay and straw bedding, leaves, different things like that, all that break down and add organic matter to the soil. But it can be costly, it can add weed seeds, and it can break down so quickly that it's tough to keep up with adding it. Now, at home and for master gardeners, I like to say give your garden a healthy diet, give it diverse things to eat. Don't do all one thing. I'm personally trying to scrounge for whatever I can to keep adding organic matter to my soil through these natural materials because our soil is low in organic matter and it's hungry for it too. It's going to break down whatever it can find. So these are more mulch options that we have to contend with. So what about wool? Well, I told you a little bit about why I'm interested in wool. I'm totally interested for lots of reasons. And so these are some of the things we've already talked about, that it has nitrogen. Anything with nitrogen is always going to pick my interest because it's really tough to keep in our soil. And the plant, it's the number one plant nutrient. So when wool breaks down, I have no idea how fast it breaks down. And so is it going to release nitrogen to the soil? How fast? Is that nitrogen going to stay in place and not be naughty? I don't know, things we have to find out. It also can insulate the soil. Maybe it can help us keep the soil cooler, right? You wear a big wool sweater in the winter to stay warmer. It keeps the heat in, but it can also keep the cool in too. If I put it on a cool soil, it can keep the sun from heating up our soil potentially. The other thing I like about it is that I don't like naked soils in a garden. I try to keep them covered with something. And so that can help us be protected from the wind that can really erode soils. And so this could maybe be a cover, but I don't know how fast it degrades. And I don't know. These are just some thoughts I had going in. Chad was very kind and let me just run with it here. So then these are all the things I had more questions about. Welcome to my house, by the way. Here you can see some wool is in a bed. There's some straw in a bed. There's wood chips in another bed. There's a lot going on. But I wondered about pricing. Farmers are buying plastic. It's not cheap. How could wool compare to that? What would we price wool at? And in particular, it's really bulky and heavy too. How can we efficiently transport it around? Is that going to be an issue with adoption? How fast does it break down in the Utah sun? Can it is it going to break down right away and I need to add more, just like grass clippings and straw? Or is it going to stick around for a long time and make it tough to till the following year if it's a system that's using tillage? How good is it at suppressing weeds? Can they just grow through it and make a big mess? I don't know. Is it harder to harvest the crops too? And so forth. So lots and lots of questions. And I bet you have even more that I'd love to hear. The other thing is that it can kind of smell, right? Smells a little bit like a wet dog, especially if we apply it and it rains right away. I like that smell. I've got 2 dogs right at my feet right now, but maybe not everybody would. So lots of things to think about and test. So our goals are, this is our first study that we did in 2023 and 2024. So those of you who came on last year heard some of this already. But as a refresher, we wanted to try 6 warm season annual flowers. Now, again, it doesn't really matter what we're testing. It's more just trying to get a range of crops. So these 6 flowers were identified by farmers and florists that we needed to produce more of in the state. And they also probably use less water. We knew that going in. They're probably going to be not such water hogs as some of our other cut flowers. And then the other reason for using these flowers is that they each had different growing patterns. Some of them were really tall and some of them were really short. Some of them grew really fast and some of them grew really slow. And so again, that's important in testing to see how are they going to respond to the wool. And then the goal here was that we were going to limit irrigation, no more than 1.5 inches per week. We tried to keep it less than 1 inch per week, and that's half the amount of our number 1 flower crop in the state, which is the dahlia. So if we get into another drought and we need to cut water use, I want to have a slew of crops that I can recommend to grow that I know have a market to sell. The other thing that we did is you can see this picture on the bottom left. This is a high tunnel. It's built with PVC, and when it's cold out, we put plastic on it. The sun will heat up the inside of the tunnel. The plastic traps that heat. It loses it at night, but that can give us an edge and help things come in sooner. It also lets us plant stuff sooner too. So I thought if we're in a drought year, could we plant some of these crops earlier in a high tunnel, get that harvest, be in and out and done before more water restrictions come? The other thing that we can do with these tunnels, and we have guides at USU if you're interested in DIYing some, is that after the danger of frost is gone, we take the plastic off and we put shade cloth over it. And it creates a cooler microclimate. It also can make the stems of the flowers grow taller. If you're someone who likes growing chilies, or if you like growing red peppers in particular, those things always get sunburn. And we found that adding shade cloth really can help the yield of some of even our warm season plants. Adding shade is very helpful. So we thought, all right, high tunnel, I'm curious about that. Almost all of our cut flowers grow better in a high tunnel than outside. But then outside, we tested planting them into wool versus planting them into bare soil. So that was our first 2 years. Then Alex came along and joined my lab this year, and we started a new trial that goes way in depth. We switched our crops. We learned enough about those 6 that we could switch to something new. And we wanted to look at 3 perennial cut flowers. We haven't done a lot of perennial work. And these seem to be water-wise, and there's also a market demand for them. So again, in my lab, I'm trying to churn through cut flowers to develop guides for best practices. And so here we wanted to expand it. I said, forget the high tunnel. We're done with those. We're just going to grow outside. We're going to look at wool versus bare soil versus plastic fabric. Do a direct comparison there. And through that, we'll be able to develop 3 new guides for how to grow these cut flowers, which I'll show more of. But then we'll also understand in depth now, this is kind of our final test of wool. We tried it with annual flowers. Now we're going to try it with perennial crops. And have some final thoughts next year. So the other thing, as I mentioned, I really like food, and I have a homestead. So whenever we had extra wool, I'd bring it home and I planted into it. And so I planted tomatoes and peppers in 2023 into wool. Last year I grew squash and potatoes in wool. I had first and second year wool. And then this year I didn't put any new wool down. So it was 2 to 3 years old. And I put squash and peppers into it. So all right, getting into the details here. Our first study, the pilot study. So this is where we tried the 6 crops when we're working with wool for the first time. We got our wool from Chad, and we tried these Gomphrena, Dianthus, Status, Strawflower, Centaurea, and Cosmos. Those are the names of the 6 cut flowers that we grew. And you can see our bare soil versus wool plots. I was really afraid it was going to blow away because we're right at the mouth of a canyon. So our first year we put netting on top of the wool to keep it in place, and it drove my students crazy. It was not needed in the end. What we found, actually, soon after we applied the wool in the spring, it rained, and that really married the wool to the soil, and the netting was not needed. We really didn't have issues with it blowing away, so we never used it again. I don't recommend netting over the wool unless you're in a very high wind location. But if you know it's going to rain out the day before or so, add the wool, and that'll help wet it down, and then it tends to stick to the soil pretty well. It won't be perfect. Some might blow away, but with that lanolin, that greasy feel to the wool, it just keeps it kind of together. All right. So that's what we did. These are pictures of those 6 flowers that we tested. We grew all of them from seed in the greenhouse and then put them out. We grew them from seed in the greenhouse every year, 23 and 24. And you can see everything getting applied here. We have drip irrigation. That's what these lines are. We put the drip underneath the wool and then the wool on top of the drip. If the drip was on top of the wool, there's a good chance that wool is going to absorb some of that irrigation water. And that's going to be a really fun thing for Alex to study, is when we do have rain. We just had rain last night for the first time in quite a few months, or not just last night, but the last couple nights. I'm curious how much that wool intercepted the rain, how much got stuck in the wool. So in our first couple of years, we really didn't know how much wool to start with. We put down 10 pounds of wool per 16 square feet. So 4x4 plots had 10 pounds each. It was about 4 inches thick. And that was pretty deep. I'll say for our shorter plants like Gomphrena, we transplanted into the wool. And the short little plants, they had trouble. It was really deep for them. So I would warn against that. The other thing that I wouldn't do is, and this is thinking about potatoes at home or dahlia cut flowers, sweet potatoes, things that are grown from tubers. I wouldn't plant the tubers and then put wool on top of it. It could get lost in the wool trying to come out, but it's really helpful once those plants emerge, then putting wool on top of that. But in our case, we were transplanting plugs into the soil. So we applied the wool and then we kind of moved it aside to transplant into it. So in 2024, here's a picture on the left of what the wool looks like after a year. It very much persisted at a 4-inch thickness. I'd say it was about a 1/2 inch to an inch thick. By the next year, it decomposed a lot, but it was still very much around. And in this annual system at our farm, we till. And so that would have gotten caught in the tractor. So we raked it off and applied fresh after we tilled these beds in year 2. We also soil tested, and I'll show you those results. No netting. It stayed in place just fine. Then here's some pictures from home of what I did. As you can see, I transplanted my tomatoes and peppers into the wool. I waited till my potatoes were out of the ground, and same with squash. I transplanted into the wool. The potatoes, I waited till they were just out of the ground, and then I used the wool in between rows. This year I've got peppers, okra, and eggplant in the wool, and as well as squash. And I don't have pictures of that from this year. The snakes, I've got garter snakes at home. They really help with mice and so forth, and they love the wool. It was kind of their hangout, and this picture of a snakeskin is to remind me of that, of my little garden helpers. Back to work though at the trial farm. So these are those 6 cut flower crops, well, mostly at the farm, and then also a picture from my house. So we irrigated twice per week for a total of 1.5 inches or less. And let's see, we fertigated, we inject our fertilizer, so we're able to fertigate that right in. At home though, I don't use very much fertilizer. I kind of take a low input approach. So I do add some fertilizer at the beginning of the year or compost. So I did that, and then I put the wool down. I don't have an injector option at home, but I do use drip at home. And then we weed it as needed. Overall observations from the first year, that it was challenging for short or slow growing plants. And we tried these warm season annuals that like it kind of hot. So one thing I would recommend in terms of thinking about when to apply the wool is that if you're growing a sun and heat loving plant like chilies and tomatoes, I would wait for the soil to warm up in the spring and then add the wool. If you put it on too soon, it's going to keep those soil temperatures kind of cold for those crops. But something like a potato that likes it cooler, it's not too soon. Once it's emerged from the ground, it's game on, in my opinion. Let's see here. Later in the season, what we found from the study is that 4 inches is a lot of wool. We don't need to apply it that thick, especially if we're going to be reapplying it each year. So by being able to use less wool, not so thick, I think that's actually good. It's going to make it easier because it's so bulky to transport, right? And so if someone wants to get a bag of wool, that helps it go a little bit further in the garden. But we found that it helped with broadleaf weeds in the first couple of years, but it didn't help with bindweed. And I'm going to talk more about that in our perennial trial coming up. But bindweed just, I don't know if any of you fight it like I do, but it just can grow through anything. And wool is no exception for that. It did provide a habitat to beneficials. One question we had was, would it help repel slugs and snails in particular? There's actually, one of my colleagues is from Germany, and that's one of their gardening, I don't know, wisdom is that wool will help repel those. And we didn't find that to be the case here. We had just as many slugs in the beginning of the year in our wool treatments as we did in the bare soil, but it was a habitat for beneficials. At home, I have flood irrigation. I've got drip and flood, and it stayed in place even with flood irrigation. So that was surprising and cool to see. So I want to show you some data, and I gotta warn you, I put a lot of graphs here. So please bear with me if you can. Hopefully they look kind of similar once we do a few. So this is our first year, 2023, and we are looking at the total yield of 3 different cut flowers. This is from the beginning of June until mid-October. And the brown line means that crop was grown in a high tunnel. That's supposed to be our luxury situation, perfect conditions. And then in the blue means it was grown in the field, exposed to the sun and so forth. And if it's dashed, that means it was grown in wool. Solid line means it was grown with bare soil. And you can see here, no matter the crop, this first one is called Cosmos. It's a huge producer. Look at this axis here. It produced over 100 stems per plant. My students were harvesting this thing every single day. It was just such a huge producer, and it really liked having the wool. It grew better in the field than in the high tunnel. It's a heat-loving flower. It's beautiful. Pollinators love it, and it grew even better in the wool. The next one is straw flower. Here's a picture of it. Straw flower, it's almost dried when you pick it. It's really nice for our farmers because they can dry it and then they can sell it after the frost, after the first freeze. They have dried flowers that they can sell. We learned a lot about this crop. It's really specific when you got to harvest it. But the bottom line here is that it liked the wool. It liked being in the field better than the tunnel, and it liked the wool a lot. And then our last one is called Centaurea, or basket flower. It kind of looks like a thistle. And as my students said, it was a pollinator party with this crop. We had so many bees that we would be harvesting and putting our flowers in buckets, and the bees would be in the buckets even. They'd follow us everywhere because they love that flower so much. It was a flower that grows for a very short time. It blooms and then it's done. So it's this nice mid-season flower to harvest. And then these other two cut flowers are something that come in later in the season. So together, they work really well together. And these three are also very tall. They're relatively fast growing too. So bottom line from this slide, everybody performed better in the wool. Nobody liked the tunnel as much as the field. So this is really exciting to have flowers that I can recommend growing outside of these tunnels, which are expensive. Here's the next three cut flowers, and you can see that there's a very similar pattern happening here. Dianthus is also known as carnation, and the ones that we grew have this beautiful clove scent. They're really cute flowers, and they also liked being outside more than in the high tunnel. They like the wool more than the bare soil. The next one is Status, which is also a dried flower, and it didn't really care where it was. It grew the same amount if it was in a tunnel, if it was just that, it just goes with the flow wherever it's going to be. So it didn't perform better or worse with the wool or being outside. And then Gomphrena is a nice one too. This is one that's really a short plant for a long time. It takes a long time to get going, and it struggled in the wool initially, but then by September it was off to the races, and it ultimately yielded better. So that was what we learned from our first study. I want to show you a little bit about what was happening in the soil, though. I mean, okay, that's all fine and good that these plants even though they are such different cut flowers, they all responded in a pretty similar way, except for Status. So thinking about the soil temperature, mulch is the solid line, the dashed line is no mulch or bare soil. And this is just looking at it on average each month in that first year. And so you can see that bare soil has a higher temperature than the mulch does in the summer. But then as the fall comes around, the wool soil is a little bit warmer. So it's a wonderful insulator. It keeps the heat out in the summertime, but the soil is warming up. And then in the fall, when it gets colder, it keeps the heat in, right? So it makes it more moderate. It doesn't make it flip around so much, which here is that same idea on steroids. So instead of looking at the monthly soil temperature, now we're looking at the hourly soil temperature from the beginning of July into late November. And here the blue line is wool and the green line is bare soil. So bare soil was over 10 degrees hotter during the day than the soil that had wool on it. And it was about 4 degrees cooler at night. So it's just a lot of up and down, up and down. And so for plant roots, plants like it to be a bit more moderated than that. And so that's one reason why we could have had a better yield, was that moderated soil temperature. Now, these flowers are all pretty hardy, and above 80 is when things get problematic in the soil. And we largely weren't too bad. 2023 was a cool, wet year for us. And so it was generally pretty good conditions. Now, all right, thinking about there's a question in here about why was there an X on straw flower? That was part of another presentation on the right stage to harvest it at. So there's a stage that you don't want to harvest it at and one that you do. And by the way, I'll make sure all these slides are available. I'll make sure you have a handout in case you want to look back and print these off. Also, there's a question here. I think it's a good point to pause before I go hard on soil moisture. And that is so can you till it in? I know you removed it and then tilled and reapplied. Otherwise, you're still throwing it away at some point. Yeah, that's a great question, Connie. Thanks for asking that. I do not recommend tilling it in. Those fibers would just wrap around the tines of the tiller too much. And actually, we had areas where we were a bit sloppy with our wool, and some of the wool was it was not in the plots, it was on the edges. And then we were trying to weed whack the weeds down, and even that made it tricky. So I think that wool, if I were to till by hand and use a garden fork or something like that, then no problem. I could absolutely till it. But if I'm going to be going in there with equipment, with a tractor or a rototiller, that would not be helpful at all. So in an annual system, that's something to consider. If it's a perennial system, though, then it can stick around, or perhaps that wool. So what actually happened after 2023, when we pulled up all that wool, we threw it in a pile. I've been sharing about this study on Instagram, and one of our farmers who lives a couple miles away asked if she could come get it. So she took all that wool to her farm and applied it on her field. So none of that actually got thrown away. This year, when we were cleaning up the 2024 field, I think it did get thrown away. But I should have advertised it because I know that farmer would have come back and taken it. I think we've caught up. Let's see. There was someone who commented too that she's had issues with herbicide on straw and hay, and that it can hold over for a season before using. And yeah, absolutely, that's a problem. I'm not an expert on herbicides, but I've absolutely had that happen. I get a lot of emails about what's wrong with my plant, and they've brought in compost from the dump, or there's herbicide residue from hay and straw. If you get turf clippings from a landscape company, that can be an issue there too. And so that is a nice thing I hadn't thought about with wool, is that I don't think that really would be so much of a concern. Okay. If you have more questions, please keep adding to it. Ooh, someone just asked if there's any issues with rodents burrowing in and eating, basically having a winter buffet. We're gonna watch for that this winter. I don't know. I do know that that's actually why we didn't put wool in the high tunnel, is because it would just make for the greatest communities of rodents. I'm pretty sure they're a big issue in our high tunnels when we're trying to do winter crops, because it's the perfect place to live in a nice warm plastic environment without snow. So yeah, we'll have to watch for that this winter for sure. Thanks for bringing that to our attention. So soil moisture, this is admittedly where I really get excited and way too nerdy probably, but volumetric water content, that's how wet the soil is. So the higher the number, the wetter the soil is. And 25% is about what crops like. The most it can get is up to 50%. That's saturated. Crops don't like that. And the bottom line here, I know I need to start moving ahead, is that the mulch soil had more moisture in it than no mulch. And we were watering the same amount, no matter if it was bare soil or wool. And so you can see that same amount of water, more is stored in the soil with wool. All right. I know I got to move along because I have a whole other story to tell you. I'm going to skip through this. It's a beautiful slide in my opinion, but it's just more about soil moisture and looking at it every day. We'll talk more about that with this year's data. What I want to share with you is what happened in the soil after we applied wool for a year. So I've got after wool, after wool versus bare soil at our farm. So we've got our pH here, typical 7.8. That's there's no change in pH, but look at the salinity. Our farm is pretty good in that we have a low salinity. The average in Utah is 1.5 to 1.75, and 2 is this threshold at which horticultural crops, our fruits, our veggies, our nuts, our flowers start, many of them start to decline. After 2, they still survive, but they don't like a salinity more than 2. That's our magic number. So you can see that after 1 season, we crept up by 0.25. So I'm really curious to see if that happens in Alex's trial this year. What is it going to be at the end of this year? And since he's repeating it next year, what is it going to be like after 2 years? I don't know. Then the next thing is our phosphorus, potassium, and nitrogen. NPK, those are our 3 primary macronutrients, the top 3 nutrients plants need. Potassium tends to build up in our soils out here in the West. Typically, we don't have to apply potassium every year. And you can see that there was an input from the wool in potassium. Phosphorus went down, and I think the reason for that is the plants used more from the soil. They were more productive in the wool, and they took up more phosphorus, and we don't get phosphorus from wool. But this is what made me squeal out loud. With that wool, this nitrate nitrogen, that's a form of nitrogen that plants really like. Our bare soil was at 2.86. Our soil is always low in nitrogen. We just have such a hard time keeping it in the soil, and we also apply it at the recommended rate. So the plants are using it. It's really tough to build up in the soil. But with wool, I've never seen it. I've been doing research at Greenville. This is my 8th year now. I've never seen it higher at the end of the season. It's not too high, but it went up by 10 points. And that's because wool is this slow release nitrogen source. It was amazing to see that. And I can't wait to see it now with Alex's trial next. So this is probably the best benefit. I'm really excited about the nitrogen, but I'm going to keep my eye on the salinity. I'm concerned about that. All right. 2024 was rough, and I got to skip this slide in the interest of time, but it actually was problematic. We had a freeze event in mid-June, and it really hurt our plants. If you're interested in that, ask me a question, and I'll be sure to come back to this at the end. All right, part 2. We just started this field season in May, so I have less to say about it, but I think it's pretty exciting. And we've already talked a bit about it. So here we wanted to go all in and really understand more about the wool, more testing, more sensors, more plants, enough to go crazy, I think. But this summer we looked at, all right, we're still going to do wool versus bare soil. But what about this persistence of it? Now we're working with a perennial crop where we can potentially leave the wool in place. So one of our treatments is that we're going to, again, do the same thing we've been doing. We apply new wool each spring. We'll take the stuff that we use this year off next spring, put new stuff down. But we'll also have beds that it's the same wool. We applied it once this year, and we're just going to ride that through next year. How is that going to change the crop response? How is that going to change the soil test results? And then we brought plastic fabric in because that is what most of our farmers are using. And then I didn't mention this here, but on the side, we're also looking at wood chips to see what happens there. We also went a little easier on the wool and went with 3 inches instead of 4. We probably could cut that further, but I want to make sure it persists into year 2. These are the flowers that we're studying this year, Echinacea, Echinops, and Eryngium. Eryngium and Echinops both have blue flowers, which are pretty uncommon. How many times do you see a blue flower? And that's what florists really want. They want more blue flowers for weddings and things like that. And so that's part of the reason. So we looked at 3 crops, different varieties of each of these 3 crops, but they're all perennials. Again, everything's grown in a greenhouse and then planted out. Here we are on wool application day, applying the wool. This is before it's spread out. Here it is after some rain. It's really amazing how it bleaches out and looks so beautiful, like the soil is tucked in. And you can see in this picture on the far right, there's bare soil, there's wool, and then there's black plastic fabric behind that. And then there's these boxes sticking out of the soil with tons of wires, and those are all kinds of environmental sensors. It helps us measure the soil moisture, the soil temperature, and so many other things. So here's a taste of that. So looking at the soil moisture, remember, the higher the number, the wetter the soil is. The blue box is kind of where we want to stay. And so now we're using soil moisture sensors to decide when to water. That means in the first 2 years, we just watered everything the same amount and saw what happened. This year, we're watering based on need. And so you can see that the bare soil tends to dry out faster. We changed our irrigation practices here. But mostly what I want to say is that we generally stayed within this blue box. So we're only watering when the soil is asking for it. How does that add up? So this is how much water we used. I've got the July total and the August total, bare soil on the left, fabric, the plastic fabric in the middle, and then wool on the right. And so for each bed, our total, we used over 1,000 gallons of water. These beds are 4 by 74 feet in size. So we're using a lot of water. But you can see that the wool, especially in July, before we changed our irrigation practices, how much less water it needed to stay in that same blue zone. So we're using less water. It's able to hang on to it because it's not evaporating out. So that's thinking about it in terms of gallons. If anyone else likes thinking about it in terms of inches, someone might say, oh, we got an inch of snow or a half inch of rain. This is the same way to think about that, but with irrigation water. So we added 3 inches of water in July with bare soil, 3.5 in August. So in total, we've used 6.5 inches of water across those 2 months. That sounds like a lot. It is a lot, but our number one cut flower, it's using about 3 inches a week. So we use that in a month for these flowers, showing that they can handle less. We did have a savings in water our first month with the wool, but it's been needing a bit more as those plants are getting bigger. And then the last way to think about irrigation is how long were we running it? And it's the same story again that we ran, this is the number of hours of irrigation. So we ran it for 13 hours with wool compared to 17 hours with bare soil. Here's the soil temperature. It's more of the same of what I told you in the last few slides. This is looking at the daily temperature in response to air temperature. Bare soil is hotter than wool at this time of year. But now I want to show you, so these are perennials. We don't harvest them in the first year. We actually pinch them so that they don't bloom and instead they build a bigger root system. So I can't show you yield, but I can show you, here's Alex measuring the height of the plants. And he also he measured one other thing. So the plant height, this is echinacea or cone flower, and bare soil is blue, fabric is black, wool is green. And so you can see the height is taller in the wool and the fabric than it is in bare soil. So bare soil is using more water and the plant's less productive. Same story for echinops, same story for eryngium. It's really nice when these different crops act the same way. So all the crops were taller with the wool, followed by fabric, followed by bare soil. Not by a lot, just a couple inches right now. They're still very small plants that we're establishing really for next year. So hopefully I can come back and talk to you some more. Then we looked at the plant canopy. So that's how much has it spread out across the ground. And you can think of it as like the width of the plant. And so it's not the same story. In this case here, well, first off, bare soil is losing in this again, but it's neck and neck right now between the fabric and the wool. And it looks like the wool is starting to overtake the fabric, but it's a horse race right now. I don't know where that's going to go. So we're thinking about it in terms of how much water are we using? How is the plant responding? And that's where we get to our final conclusion. And also important, how is the soil responding? Logistics though, time to get real. This is a picture of bindweed. There's a dandelion in here too. Weeding is very time consuming, as Alex can attest, and wool is no match for bindweed. Alex spends a lot of time weeding, and it's really tough to get the bindweed out of the wool. It's all, the wool is stuck on the bindweed, and we don't want to just throw out the wool. So he's trying to peel it off essentially. And so that's the biggest thing. So I'm concerned about the bindweed. That's been the most significant drawback. There's some other ones too. There could be some salt burn from the wool. As I said, it increases the salinity, so we have to investigate that some more. And then the other thing is that we're testing the wool at one farm in Cache Valley. So we have a silt loam soil, but how is the wool going to behave with different plants and with different soils around the state? I'd be really curious. Your soils are a lot different than the soils up in the northern part of Utah. I'd love to test, how does the wool persist down in southern Utah? How do plants behave with it. And so if you're interested in participating in the study next year, I think we'd like to open it up for more sites where we send you some wool and we can send some instructions and just learn how to, what happens. We just want to know more. So summary of findings so far is that when we did those 6 annual cut flowers, they performed better with the wool than bare soil, except for status. It didn't care where it was grown, same thing. We were able to hold more moisture in the soil that had wool mulch. We also had some nitrogen release, and we also had more moderated soil temperatures. So did those 5 flowers that did better in the wool, was it because they had more moisture? Was it because they had more nitrogen? Or was it because they had more moderated soil temperatures? My best guess is that it was the moisture and probably the nitrogen a little bit too. So with the perennials, we're seeing more growth with the wool and fabric, and we're seeing less water use too with that. We'll find out about the yield next year. But the question remains, how do we weed more efficiently? Does anyone have any ideas of, you can picture these vines that we're pulling out of the wool and then trying to pull the wool off of the vines, and they grow really fast. And so that's something that we need to contend with, as well as we'd love to be testing this in more locations. So with that, you made it. Thank you so much for tolerating all my graphs and following along and asking amazing questions. I'm going to turn to the chat now to see what you all have added into that. But I also want to acknowledge we've had a lot of people help with this study. And I have to ask you, I'm going to put a link in the chat here that we do need to ask you to please fill out our survey for Utah State. There's 5 questions. It should go pretty quickly. I think we can also send it to you in an email as well, but Utah State really needs this to be able to report that on these talks. So with that, take a few seconds, add some questions in. Please, I'm just trying to grab that link right now and put it in the chat. That's why I minimized my screen, but I want to answer your questions. Let's see. All right, putting the link in the chat right now. That's okay. Let's see here. So I answered the wrote it question. We don't know yet. We got to find out. Why don't you compost the leftover wool? Absolutely, that could be an option. I think that's a really good idea too, because it has that nitrogen in it. And one of the things we're really curious about this year is how much nitrogen is in it when we apply. From Chad, I know it's between 10 and 12%, but we want to get it tested and then test it again at the end of the season to see how much nitrogen came out of the wool, and then next year, how much comes out of year 2. So how fast is that release? And I think that would be really interesting. I think it could be applied to someone's compost. You would just have to make sure it's not too thick of a mat. You want to incorporate that in. I think that's a great idea. I'm wondering if the sweat in the unwashed wool versus washed wool changes the salinity. That's a really good question. So there's sweat in the wool, certainly, but there's also manure and urine in the wool as well. The wool also has this mineral content, and many minerals count as salts in the soil. So potassium, for example, number 3 plant nutrient, or top 3 plant nutrient, that actually counts as a salt in the soil. So when we measure soil salinity, we're not just doing table salt or sodium. We're looking at potassium and sulfate and all these different things that can also come out of the wool when it's breaking down. But I think that would be an amazing question to test. Of if we wash the wool, there's not that manure in urine, which has a lot of salinity in it too. We don't have the sweat. How could that change it? But I will say though that our salinity only went up by a 0.25. I'm not overly concerned yet. Maybe watering deeper to offset the salinity. Yes, that is something to consider too. And I think Alex is going to be able to measure that to some extent, because the soil sensors that we put in that are measuring the soil moisture and temperature, they also are measuring salinity. So he'll be able to kind of track that with time and see. Thank you for bringing that question up. We want to make sure we add that. Yes, I will email the presentation for sure. Yeah. Oh, so someone else would be interested in the results of using washed versus unwashed wool. And maybe I can turn this back to you all. If you have washed wool and unwashed wool, would you be willing to put it out? And then I would pay for your soil test. I mean, you could send me the soil, we'll test it and find out if that changed the soil salinity or not. Does lanolin have any effect on natural plant waxes? That's a really great question. I don't know the answer to that. My understanding is that the lanolin breaks down pretty quickly in our Utah sun, in our high mountain sun. But that's something I should ask. I'll have to think more about how the lanolin persists or doesn't, and if it has, kind of effect with it too in the soil. Ooh, a mites for a bindweed control. The only thing I know that actually can control bindweed is 2,4-D, a pest or an herbicide. I don't know that mites targeted enough to take it down because it just grows so fast. I don't know if Alex knows how many inches per day this thing grows, but it's pretty high out there. If anyone finds another control for bindweed, let me know. I think everyone in the state wants to know. I will say though, with black plastic mulch, it does help with weeding because it's searching for sunlight, so it can only come out of the holes that we've cut for the plants. And so it's a lot faster to weed with fabric and even bare soil. Oh, someone doesn't see in the chat. Thank you. That's because I needed to press enter. So the survey link is now in the chat. Please click on it and fill it out. 5 questions. It shouldn't take more than a minute or two, but we really do need it for reporting at Utah State. Oh, interesting. There were some experiments in New Mexico with NMSU with mites and bindweed. I will have to follow up with you because I would love to read more about that. I'd be very, very interested. All right, let's see here. All right, we're 2 minutes over, so I want to make sure anyone who has to leave, please feel comfortable doing so. But if anyone wants to stick around and talk wool with me some more, I'm happy to do so. Oh, look at the Colorado Department of Agriculture regarding bindweeds.
Okay.
Okay.
Before some of you decide to take off, I just would like for you guys to quickly fill out our polls that just now popped up on your screen. So if you don't mind, before you leave, just give us a review of our tonight's presentation, and I greatly appreciate it. I know some of you are coming from Colorado and Wisconsin, so that's pretty remarkable. So thank you for, tuning in. For filling out the location of where you're coming from, I know for number 5 says chapter affiliation. In county, we normally get listeners that are from New Mexico. So this is pretty new, and I'm excited to see that our NSA project is really branching out of state. So if you could just kindly put down what county you're from and in Colorado. So that way it gets me an idea of how far of an outreach we are going. But I appreciate you guys. Thank you so much. And if you have kind of questions, feel free to unmute yourself. Or better yet, you can just keep putting them in the chat box. Let me see.
And then, Mikkel, would it work for you if I emailed you a PDF of my
slides
yes. and the link for my survey?
Yes, that is totally fine.
Okay, cool. I'll plan to do that right after.
So for those of you that have asked about the copy of the presentation, sometimes next week, I will share the webinar and the location where to find it on our YouTube channel, as well as a copy of Dr. Scott's PowerPoint slides.
Sweet.
Will you be having, sometimes next year of samples that you guys will maybe distribute to folks that are down here?
We'd be interested in that, and maybe that's something you and I can coordinate where you're kind of the central hub. But yeah, Alex has some really great ideas where we can keep this even kind of small scale. We really want to know how fast it breaks down on different soils, different weather conditions, different regions. And we'd be so interested in that. And that washed versus unwashed has really got me thinking now too. I don't have access to washed wool. But if anyone's interested, I think, well, you'll see my handout. But it includes my email address. It includes my Instagram as well. If you want to follow along, we try to put updates. But please reach out if you'd like to. Let me know where you are, if you have access to wool already, and we can try to figure something out. So I'd love to have you participate. So. Ooh, interesting. There was just a wool buy at NNDA. It'd be nice to have a separate area for people to donate or sell wool tags to gardeners. That would be. We were kind of talking, and I'd be curious what you all think would be the easiest way to do this. We were kind of thinking about having field days where we invite wool producers and farmers and gardeners, and so that they can meet each other and exchange information, find your local wool producer to be able to just directly pick that up, since it's not centralized so much. But I love that as of having a wool buy. That's cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that was brought up since last year.
Mm.
Um, because there's not that many locations, or I should say hardly any locations where some of the producers here on the reservation can sell their wool, because majority of what they have breeds there are I know of are pretty much meat breeds that don't have like a good fine wool uh
Yes.
sell to folks that are still weaving. So they really have coarse wool and it doesn't make any profit for them whatsoever. So that's why it goes to the landfill. Then,
And
yeah.
that's, and just as a side note, I am not a wool expert at all, and Chad helps me along a lot. But that's what we're really interested in is, can we use coarse wool too? So say the
Yeah.
market for fine wool gets better, there still could be a use for coarse wool. Yeah, that's really, ooh, from the Philippines. Oh my gosh, how cool. All
We're
right.
getting a lot of folks that are out of New Mexico. So that's pretty new what we're having on here. But thank you to those of you that are tuning in.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
exciting. I was looking at that.
Right? Yeah. Okay. All right. So I'm seeing some of you are filling out our polls. Thank you so much. So do we have any questions regarding the presentation for tonight, or some of you can go ahead and insert them in the chat box? If there's none, then we'll go ahead and conclude with our presentation tonight.
Okay. Let's see. I think yeah, I hope so too on the funding. Um, but all right. Well, thank you all. It has been such a pleasure to get to talk to you tonight. And maybe I can even see you next year when we have another year, our final year of the study in. So thanks again for all your amazing questions and comments and your attention. Have a
Yes,
great rest of
thank
your day.
you, Willing.
Yes, thank you from Navajo Sustainable Agriculture.
Ah.
Okay. All right, you guys. So let me back up here. Um, so that will conclude our presentation for this evening. I see that some of you are still filling out our polls. This may, just be pertaining to those that live here in New Mexico, but for those of you who are maybe closer nearby, our neighboring states like Colorado, if you're in the area, we do have an upcoming event that's coming up in September. So you're more than welcome to join us if you ever come down in the Farmington area. So I just wanted to share some upcoming events. And for those of you that are coming in from Colorado, like I said, in Wisconsin, we do have more webinar events. So just like what Dr. Scott has mentioned, she's been working closely with the sheep and goat specialist from Utah State, and that is Chad Page. So he is really such an excellent source when it comes to questions regarding sheep health and what to do when you are dealing with internal or external parasites. So for next week, we do have ewe replacement and culling. All of my sheep producers that are on here, this is definitely something that you want to partake in. His presentations really are eye opener, and it just makes you want to improve your operations to the better. And so I highly suggest that you guys participate in this. So if you want, you can scan your QR code if you're tuning in from your desktop, and it will lead you to a new tab, and you just go ahead and register from there. So this is going to be on September 4th. And for those of you that are just now new to joining us, all of our webinars start at 5:30 p.m. Mountain Time. So for the following one, we do have poultry management. This is pretty new for us to have as far as webinars. We only introduced this twice, but I've got to see more insights from our polls from the past couple of months that folks that want to have poultry in their backyard, what type of management that they should incorporate into their, poultry production. So this is going to be presented by Newton Hatchery. So Darcy Newton comes from Bloomfield, New Mexico, and they have been raising chickens for a very long time. I don't know what it comes to raising chickens. All I know is that they are pretty much like my pets. But they do come, with diseases sometimes, and you just want to know how to combat those diseases. They do actually have a sort of health schedule, and how to monitor for signs of illnesses, and promptly trying to isolate those sick birds to prevent that spread of pathogens to other healthy birds. What are the kind of the stress management for overcrowding during extreme temperatures, as well as appropriate housings? What are you looking for as the type of breeds? Are you looking for meat breeds? Are you looking for show breeds? What type of breeds are better for egg production, and so forth? So it encompasses everything from selecting breeds to financial oversight, from ensuring the health and productivity and profitability and so forth. So there's so much that goes into the poultry management that she's going to touch base on. Like I've said, her family has been raising chickens for a very long time, and I'm sure they're going to continue doing so. So I highly suggest some of you that are maybe local, they do have a local hatchery in Bloomfield. You may want to check that out if you're interested. Once you have participated into this poultry management webinar, maybe it might spark your interest to start your poultry business, your egg production business, I should say. Okay. So we do have an upcoming event. We do have a livestock first aid workshop that is coming up on September 26th. And we are happy to have it host at the San Juan McGee Park, that's located in Farmington, New Mexico. So if you are interested in this, and we've had a lot of folks that are wanting to participate every single year, we have new folks that participate. This is just kind of like an overview for ranchers and farmers to know how to mend external minor wounds when you're not even close or even nearby a vet clinic. We know how hard it is for us folks that live on the reservation, and how far it is to access a veterinarian. And there's not many veterinarian clinics that we have access to, so it's kind of solely on us on how to keep that animal alive until we do seek a veterinarian to get their assistance. So this is going to be more on the vaccination techniques, deworming processing. We also have implemented this new session is how to suture external minor wounds. And you'll be actually using kind of like these little test dummies to how to suture, and a demonstration of trick testing on bulls, as well as, hands-on vaccinations on cattle and sheep. And we do have vet bags that we will be distributing out per family. So our presenter slash demonstrator is coming from New Mexico State University, and he's Dr. Wenzel, and he's the extension veterinarian that always provides us some assistance when it comes to these first aid training workshops. He's very hands-on, and he will help basically everyone how to use the kit bag. And it was him that I got together to what is need to be implemented in a kit bag from his own perspective as a extension veterinarian. So we got the chance to get all the materials in the kit, and he will show basically on hands on how to implement that kit. And I find this very helpful for our ranchers out here on the reservation, because we have no idea what you're going to run into, whether your cattle or your calves have run through the fence. If you're weaning them and they decide to, like, they don't want to stay by themselves and they need their mom, and they, caught themselves in the barbed wire, that can just happen any time of day. And so you have that kit, you take in that workshop, and you know how to apply that. Registration is required. I highly recommended this because lunch will be provided and it's going to be catered. So if you're coming with your family, do include their names. That way we know how many people are attending and we don't get the same family member signed in twice. All right. So this is just kind of an overview of all of our past livestock first aid workshops. We had them hosted in various areas. Some of them from Bread Springs, some of them from Crown Point. We did have some stationed out in Shiprock area. So some of them are a bit blurry, so I apologize for that. We did have 1 year with the horse clinic, but we didn't get a lot of participation rate from that day. So now we just brought it down to just the cattle and the sheep portion. We did have some folks that took pictures of themselves when they were suturing. Here you can't really see it visibly. It's a bit blurry, but here we had one family that participated in the livestock first aid training workshop, and this was during the shearing season, and they've kind of nipped that sheep on the leg. So they implemented their teachings into that that day. So this is kind of the vet bag that we had from the start with, from the very beginning of 2 years ago. But then once we kind of got an idea of what the veterinarian would like to see more in the kit bags, replacing some of these materials, it's a lot better now. Okay. So here, I just wanted to show you guys, I know some of you from the past has participated in our webinars. There's some folks that are new. Here is just kind of a screenshot of our website. It's pretty much updated now. So if you type in your URL, nsa.nmsu.edu, it will bring you to this homepage of ours. It has just an introduction to who we are as a project. And here's the tabs that you're going to look at above. For iPhone, it's gonna look a whole lot different than this. But when it comes to registering for our webinars or in-person events, it's going to be this tab here where it says upcoming events. And the next page is going to show you that tab here. So our next presentation is going to be on ewe replacement and culling. And this is going to be on September 4th. So where you say registration is required, then that red box here or red highlighted register here, you're going to click that and it's going to take you to another tab and you just fill it out. So we will send out a reminder that same day. 2 reminders usually go out, and the first in the morning, then 1 hour before the webinar happens. Okay, so here is just kind of the contact information of all of our team members. Myself, we do have a project director that oversees our whole NSA project. We do have Miss Shirley Toth, who handles all of the conservation planning program, and Terrell Yazzie, who handles the FSA programs, and Emiliano McLean. We're happy to have him on board, and he's our horticulture specialist. Miss Cheryl Toth, who handles all of our platform and keeps us running. Tiffany Toth, who is also our resource technician that's out in the field working one-on-one with our producers on their conservation plans. So for NSA social platforms, I'm gonna wrap this up. Like I've mentioned, we have an NSA website, is pretty updated. So I've just shown you just not too long ago on how to navigate our upcoming events. We do have a Facebook page that was just kind of cut off from our homepage here, but if you head to our website and just kind of scroll down, you can go ahead and click on our Facebook link. So it should take you directly there. And we do have a YouTube channel. So like I've mentioned from the far beginning, all of our webinars are recorded and they will be shared the following week on our YouTube channel. And we will share the information and update on our Facebook page, where majority of our followers happen to follow us, and that's how they get updated on this stuff. So I myself is Mikkel Silversmith, and I'm your host and moderator for this evening, and I serve as the Navajo Sustainable Agriculture Project Coordinator. Okay, if my mouse is working, and I hope it does. Okay, so just a couple overview of who we are as a project. So we're known as the Navajo Sustainable Agriculture Project. In short, we're called the NSA Project. We're part of the New Mexico Cooperative Extension Service under New Mexico State University. And we deliver in collaboration with two of our major project partners, which is Dene College Land Grant Office, as well as the COPE, which stands for Community Outreach and Patient Empowerment. And we use these guys a lot when it comes to their own backgrounds, whether they're in horticulture, that's pertaining to gardening outreach, or some of the Dene College specialists will be cattle specialists as well as horticulture specialists. So we do use a lot of their expertise from their area to share with our producers down here. And so our project is funded by the USDA Outreach and Assistance for Native Farmers and Ranchers and Veteran Farmers and Ranchers program. So just kind of an overview of what we do is our main goal is to help operations improve profitability and sustainability through our educational platform. So we do provide education assistance when it comes to conservation planning assistance, helping producers here in our area and Eastern and Northern Navajo agencies develop a basic conservation plan to be an attachment to their overall grazing permit whenever they submit them to the Bureau of Indian Affairs and Natural Resources. As well as just the basic knowledge when it comes to animal husbandry. We always get those, and it doesn't hurt to repeat them every year because we have new people, new faces coming on here virtually as well as in person. So we get a lot of new folks that come in to learn more about the basic of animal husbandry. With that comes with vaccinations for all different types of livestock, from horses, sheep, cattle, goats, as well as deworming and so forth. And it not just goes for animal husbandry, but we also do the basics when it comes to horticulture. So this time around, we're, kind of dying down on the seasonal harvesting. So we might be coming around that time, just depending on where you guys live. We do provide assistance in workshops as well. So right now we're hitting those schools and these local areas like Crown Point, as well as Lake Valley, all the BIE schools when it comes to local production and consumption of vegetables and healthy foods by families and individuals. So we're happy to help the kids develop a curriculum, or happy to help the kids to go through agriculture and let them know where their food comes from and so forth. And secondly, we do help producers increase their knowledge in USDA programs. All of you may on here are already familiar with NRCS and FSA. So now we have a tap-in program that allows producers, once they have submitted their conservation plans and they went through the BIA process to get them approved, then we can help those that are wanting to dive deeper into Farm Service Agency programs. So if that's any sort of drought loss type programs that you want to tap into, we definitely can help with that. And services and those of other resource providers, and that would be more on the Navajo Nation Department of Agriculture. They provide the Agriculture Infrastructure Fund every year. So we always make sure that our producers are well aware about those programs when it comes to our Facebook. So we want to make sure that our followers know what type of services, what type of resources that NNDA has to offer.